I'm going to go ahead and start because, as should be expected, I have crammed way too much into 1 hour class, and I want to leave time for discussion. So,
if you're not on the email distribution list and you would like to be, raise your hand and I'll bring you the pad. Everybody's already on it, okay?
So today we are going to talk about clean energy. This is a book that my older sister, my bossy older sister, told me about just a few days ago. And Ashley witnessed this. I, of course, resisted and said, I don't have time, I want to look at that book. I've got the Sunday school class coming up, I'm way too busy. And I started reading it, and I said, oh my gosh, this book is exactly what my Sunday school class is going to be about on Sunday. So I came down the next morning, she was staying at our house, and I said, thanks for the book.
You were right.
So one of the authors of this book was the lead climate science reporter for the New York Times and a fellow at the Harvard Center for the Environment. The other is an engineer with an undergrad and graduate degree from Stanford, who now heads a nonpartisan climate policy firm and advises leaders from the United States and other countries on how to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And I know this is a lot of text, but I'm going to read this out loud because this is exactly what I'm going to talk about today. Many people are already trying to help in their own ways, perhaps by buying a Prius or an electric car, recycling diligently, installing smart thermostats, eating less meat, maybe contributing money to an environmental group. These actions are important, but by themselves they are not enough. Sorry, runny nose. The world will not be saved by conscientious green consumers who decide, one family at a time, to drive less or install solar panels on the roof. The problem is just too big for that. So chapter 2 is the part that really corresponds to today's class. Here's a statistic that it cites. Worldwide, 38% of carbon dioxide that is overheating the climate comes from power plants. Of that, 33% of the carbon dioxide in the United States comes from power plants. So here is another excerpt from chapter 2. Under a time-worn regulatory model, utility commissions routinely grant the companies they control permission to build new plants and other equipment, and then authorize new electricity rates that allow the utilities to earn a fixed profit margin on that gear. This arrangement is not an incentive for economic efficiency. It is an incentive to build as much new equipment as possible, then stick consumers with the bill, customers. So today I'm going to show most of a short documentary that was recommended by Interfaith Power and Light, which, as many of you know, is a national leader in engaging faith communities in environmental stewardship and climate action. One of our presenters in the Earth Care Sunday School series that we had 3 years ago was from North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, which is one of 40 state IPL affiliates. And the North Carolina chapter of Interfaith Power and Light is a program of the North Carolina Council of Churches. So Interfaith Power and Light's 2023 featured film is Current Revolution, and that's actually a series of short films from the American Resilience Project. The series explores the transition from fossil fuels to renewables with a focus on national security, economic prosperity, and environmental justice. And by the way, next week's class will be devoted entirely to environmental justice. I'm going to show most of part one of this series, which is titled "The Transformation Cannot Be Stopped." I'm going to show you about 21 minutes of the 37-minute entire short film. I would encourage you to watch the whole thing. I'm going to tell you how to find it online for free, thanks to Interfaith Power and Light. Okay. And like I said, I'm going to pause it a couple of times and just jump forward to 3 different segments that I want to share with you.
The first thing that I would have to say is the fact that I am a believer. I believe that God created this world and put that sun out there, in my opinion, for us to take advantage of.
For those people in the fossil fuel industry, it is a simple truth that your business is going to go away.
It's just a matter of figuring out how to do that without leaving people behind or destabilizing the system.
Basically, every utility in this country still adheres to the old business model, which is let's go out there and build big power plants. Meanwhile, their customers want more and more solar energy efficiency and storage. So you have this clash of what customers want and the business model of the past of the utilities.
To an average consumer, what they want the light to come on when they flip the switch, and they want to be able to pay the bill. You don't really have the appreciation of electricity until you don't have it.
We've got to understand that we have a moral obligation. We've got to be very much concerned about who we put into power and decisions about our life. I can get out and march all day long, but unless we understand the political process and who we put in office to make the decision, then it's all for naught.
The electric power system has been one of the most successful and reliable technological systems that we've developed in the modern age.
Electricity is almost like air. People just assume it's always going to be there. The system that we've inherited was fine for the 1930s and 1940s, but it's not as resilient as it should be. It's not as smart as it should be. It's not serving people as effectively as it should be. There's a vested interest in maintaining that old system, but there's a larger openness to thinking about how can we move to a new grid system that meets the needs of the 21st century.
The original grid was designed to allow power to flow in one direction from the generator to the user. And now we've got the need for power to flow in both directions, and the utility feels threatened by that. The utility in this state does not want to advance the solar, other than if they own it. But they see solar as a out-and-out competitor.
In 6 states across the country, power companies are fighting to change the rules.
Presented thousands of signed cards from supporters, urging commissioners not to change net metering rates. Shouldn't I have the freedom to put solar panels up on my roof if I want? Shouldn't that be my choice? Should there really be a utility telling me, no, you can't do that? If they keep trying to push that, more and more people are just gonna disconnect from the grid.
Okay. And now I'm going to play the second of 2 segments.
that you make a profit off of.
As soon as electricity became central to the health of economies and to the vitality of cities, we decided, you know what? Providing this technology is too important to leave it in the hands of unregulated for-profit companies. And that's why we have public utility commissions that regulate for-profit utility companies to make sure that they're serving the greater public interest while they're making a profit.
To read from Psalm 133, Mountains of Zion, where there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forever. In Christ do we pray. Amen.
The Public Utilities Commission has a huge impact on clean air, on clean water, but most importantly on the amount of money people have to pay utilities.
We've been living with this for years and years and years, and we want a change.
Monday, the town hall adjourned fast was filled with nearly 100 people to discuss electric costs. What the public is tired of is monthly electric bills costing as much as $1,000.
I got a young couple behind me at back-to-back $600 plus electric bill. We've got people who actually have a higher utility bill than they do a mortgage on their house.
If your Public Utility Commission doesn't have a strategy for building the utility of the future, then demand that they do it.
This is a very powerful group of people that sets policies around our livelihood.
2019 Renewable Energy Development Initiative.
All in favor of staff's recommendation, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So if you want to have a balanced public service commission, first of all, know the issues, study the issues, study who's there, study who's retiring, and put somebody in there that will address your issue.
You want me to untie the front?
Yes, please. I don't have to go to the governor and ask the governor if I can do such and such. I don't have to go to the legislature and ask them if I can introduce a body to do this and this, because I'm not appointed by the governor, I'm not elected by the legislature. I have to answer to 10 million people in this state who I have to answer to. Because they don't my 3 million vote, but
I think when it comes to power companies, I understand the position where they are. Their job, like everything else in our system, is to return a dollar for their investors. Now, when the companies can begin to say, how do we make a profit as well as protect the environment, then I think we're on the right path.
I want the power company at the table when it comes to developing solar and EVs, because they have the money, they have the infrastructure. It's their job to help develop this infrastructure, and if we're asking them to do that, then they're going to have to be compensated for that.
We have to give our utilities the opportunity to make money in a way that satisfies what their customers really want. And begin to shift them away from that addiction to rate basing and building big power plants. And it is an addiction. They're addicted to it because Wall Street encourages it, they make a lot of money off of it, and when that's how they meet their quarterly earnings targets, that's what they're gonna do.
Last time I'm going to do this to you.
And you cannot beat an electric car off the line. We have 100% torque from zero.
Now, for the first time in history, renewable energy is the cheap option. And as soon as solar plus storage and wind plus storage is the same cost or cheaper than every other source like gas and coal and nuclear, then why would we choose anything else?
utility. They could terrify you, or you could see them as an opportunity to own them, to facilitate them, to earn money off of them. There's nothing really stopping the utility from being the one to provide that battery storage to its customers. There's nothing stopping the utility from making the proposal to its Public Utilities Commission to say, hey, we'd like to make money off of providing battery storage to all of our customers.
And of course, battery storage is the very best kind of responsive, flexible resource that utilities like. If a utility suddenly has a spike in demand and they need to ramp up production, if they're trying to ramp up from a coal-fired power plant, it's going to take a couple hours. If they're trying to ramp up from a natural gas-fired power plant, it's going to take a couple of minutes. If they're trying to ramp up from a battery storage, it's going to take a couple of milliseconds. It's instantaneous. It's such a superior technology, we're going to turn the corner so fast it will make people's heads spin.
If the utility industry and the automotive industry don't work well together, what you're going to see is the emergence of third parties. You're already seeing Google enter the automotive industry. And could Google enter the utility industry as well? I mean, where there is a void, someone's going to step in to fill the void.
The investor-owned utilities of this nation, they've got to protect their investors. They've got to have the visionaries on their boards, on their staff, to understand what impact the electric vehicles is going to have, what impact solar energy is going to have, wind energy is going to have, what impact is the continuation of fracking going to have. Are we going to be able to continue fracking all the time, or some of these lawsuits going to dispel fracking?
The question is, if you're an oil man, for example, what is your future? Fossil fuels have to come out of the energy mix. How are you going to respond? Do we continue to merge around a smaller and smaller industry, and eventually the last person in the room turns out the light? Or do we transform ourselves into something else? Do we transform ourselves into renewable energy companies? Do we transform ourselves into carbon management companies? If carbon dioxide has to come out of the atmosphere, oil companies could be good candidates for the ones that need to do it.
The oil industry is really largely unregulated. So unlike the electric industry, which can be transitioned from a regulatory standpoint and I think could have a soft landing, the oil industry is, I think, a lot more vulnerable to that sort of crash landing. And so it's going to be up to the shareholders of these oil companies to say, what are we going to do to pivot?
There's kind of an obvious solution for gas stations is turn them all into charging stations. They already got covers, so make all of that solar. They're all connected to the grid already. Change is hard, and large complex systems are particularly hard, but all the pieces are in place. It's available, we know how to do it, we just have to figure out how to manage that change at an institutional level without putting lots of businesses at risk of having stranded assets, because those businesses will suffer, the investors in those businesses will suffer, and the workers in those industries will suffer.
I've been in the solar consulting industry since 2008. We do installations now in a day to 2 days tops. My sales are all from referrals. I do not knock on doors. I don't do any of those things. All referrals.
I've lived in Pebble Creek since 2001. Moved from Tennessee to Arizona. For the most part, it's a very conservative community. So when I began advocating solar electric, I was concerned that it might be a partisan issue. It is not a political issue, it is apolitical.
Hey Charlie, how are you?
I am terrific.
Great, you're good.
You really are. And I gotta tell you.
So what is the
The
number
whole
now?
area has a ton, 1,406.
So we're officially at 1,406 solar energy systems
Yes.
on rooftops in
On
Pebble Creek,
rooftops in Pebble Creek.
which is what, 30%?
30%.
Of the entire community.
Yes.
Come on in, good to see you. I'm Cher.
Morning, welcome.
When I was on the commission, we established the policies like net metering and the renewable energy standard that really led to the boom of solar in Arizona. Believe it or not, it was an all-Republican commission at the time, and we actually believed that people would go solar. You know, I'm curious as a former commissioner, why you initially decided to do it.
If I can save $2,000, $2,200 a year, why would I not do that? Particularly on fixed incomes.
My first Arizona summer electric bill. I'd never seen a $400 monthly electric bill, and I was scandalized by that number.
It's free, it's sun, you know.
And there are no downsides.
Let's look at using that.
If we can scatter the creation of electricity throughout a neighborhood, we don't have to build a giant plant right out here in the desert that burns coal and fouls the air of the Grand Canyon and requires transmission lines to get the power back into town.
I think of the utility companies as the bully. For all of us around here, we want solar for the right reasons. It's the right thing to do for us, for the environment, for our neighbors, for the country. And then you're fighting the people that are doing it for greed. And it ticks me off.
If we don't get our act together and start utilizing the technologies that are available to us now, the United States is going to be left in the dust.
Technologies we invent.
Yes, that we invent, we're going to be left in the dust.
There's virtually no one that is opposed to solar. Now that differs from our elected officials who think that they need to be anti-solar, but they're going against their constituents when they say that.
Can you give us an update on the tax credit or any bills that impact electric vehicles?
All new build residential has to be EV ready. Just making the business case, we're gonna literally drive traffic to your establishments, to rent in your units if you can provide EV spaces. The market is demanding this.
And that's why the commissioners need to understand electric vehicles. They need to be driving them. I've been criticized a little bit by my own party for wanting to subsidize electric vehicles or to give solar more value. There are benefits to a tax credit, for example, for electric cars. Georgia was second only to California before we removed our tax credit. So when the legislature eliminated it, electric car sales began to skid in our state, dropped 95%, as a matter of fact.
Solar is not something that only tree huggers like. What is more conservative than generating your own electricity and not being dependent on someone else to do it for you?
Just because they're conservative doesn't mean they can't embrace electric cars. Or like not having to be beholden to whatever the utility decides they want to charge them. There's a while where when I first came out to North Carolina and I was racing, I wanted to fit in. And at some point I just realized I'm so different from so many people in the garage that I sort of gave up on fitting in. I will have hit 70,000 miles by the time I get home on the Tesla. I mean, think of how much money I've saved in gas over 70,000 miles. without the race car, the demographic of people that I would be able to reach would be so much smaller if I was just still a biology and scientist. I can't expect NASCAR fans to show up at a clean energy conference in Aspen. You know, it's not gonna happen. They're not gonna come to the Environmental Film Festival. It's sort of like I'm on these two sides and I'm balancing these two worlds, and I don't fit in completely on either side, but I get to see both of those audiences talking to me as one of them. And there is so much more that we share than what the audience does.
Put it on a moral foundation. Everyone has a right to clean water, to toxic-free air. When we talk about many of the environmental injustice issues, this is a civil rights issue of our time.
Take care and protect my creation. We will stand as one united force.
And we, as human beings who've been charged with being stewards of a planet that has been given to us that is perfectly balanced in terms of water, in terms of air, and we have been destructive and we have neglected our moral responsibility in doing what's so necessary so that not the next generation, this generation, can have a more sustainable way of life. So therefore, we have an obligation to fight. We will not bend, we will not break, and we will not bow down.
As a filmmaker, I have to make you watch the credits. It's our code.
I'm serious.
It's also interesting to watch credits, particularly documentary credits. So, Current Revolution, as I mentioned, is the featured film this year of Interfaith Power and Light. It's part of what they are calling their Faith Climate Action Week, which is actually going to be a week plus in April, and we'll give you more information about that. But the theme, Interfaith Power and Light's theme this year for Faith Climate Action Week is Living the Golden Rule, a just transition to a clean energy economy. Okay, I'm about to depress you again, because I have to, and you all probably heard about this from last week. This past Monday, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, which is a group of experts convened by the United Nations, released the most comprehensive understanding to date of the ways in which the planet is changing. So this is the lead paragraph from the Washington Post article that was on the previous slide. The world is likely to pass a dangerous temperature threshold within the next 10 years, pushing the planet past the point of catastrophic warming, unless nations drastically transform their economies and immediately transition away from fossil fuels, according to one of the most definitive reports ever published about climate change. But fortunately, the IPCC report contains some hope. This is the lead paragraph from the IPCC press release about this report. There are multiple feasible and effective options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to human-caused climate change, and they are available now. Okay? Now we're going to flip-flop from fortunately back to unfortunately. Unfortunately, we are still headed in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. Blockbuster profits last year for big oil, and CO2 emissions hit new record highs that very same year. So, last Tuesday, the day after the IPCC report, this happened. Did anybody participate in this? No. Senior citizens led protests in cities across the country, including Charlotte, Greensboro, Asheville, and you guessed it, Chapel Hill, targeting Chase Bank, Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo to stop financing fossil fuel-related businesses. The protests were sponsored by an organization called Third Act, which is led by the author and climate activist Bill McKibben, one of my favorite people who has ever walked the earth. Third Act says, experienced Americans. Isn't that a lovely way to make of ourselves? We are experienced Americans. Well, I will be in 5 months when I turn 60. But experienced Americans are the fastest growing part of the population. 10,000 people a day past the 60-year mark. That means there's no way to make the changes that must be made to protect our planet and society unless we bring our power into play. So as I mentioned last week, Governor Cooper signed a landmark bipartisan energy bill for North Carolina in October of 2021 that aims to dramatically reduce the state's power plant greenhouse gas emissions. So how bipartisan it is. Here is House Speaker Tim Moore, Republican, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, and President of the Senate Phil Berger, all there together. House Bill 951, titled Energy Solutions for North Carolina, requires the North Carolina Utilities Commission to, quote, take all reasonable steps to achieve a 70% reduction in emissions of carbon dioxide from electric public utilities from 2005 levels by the year 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. All right, what's carbon neutrality? The law says that carbon neutrality means for every ton of CO2 emitted in the state from electric generating facilities owned or operated by or on behalf of electric public utilities, an equivalent amount of CO2 is reduced, removed, prevented, or offset. The law also required the North Carolina Utilities Commission to develop what would be North Carolina's first ever carbon plan by December of 2022, so last December, to achieve these emission reductions by December 31st, 2022.
How do we do?
Sorry, first ever carbon plan by December 22 to achieve these emission reductions by December 31st, 2022, and to review the plan every 2 years. These new carbon plans must be developed with stakeholders, us, and with the utilities. So in May of 2022, last May, Duke Energy filed its proposed carbon plan. In June, intervening parties filed responses to Duke's plan, and then in July and August, the Utilities Commission held hearings to receive public comment on Duke's plan. What do you think has been the response from clean energy advocates to Duke's proposed plan, which it reduced in May of 2022? Yes, that's right. We can't, here's the quote from the Sierra Club, we can't accept any carbon plan scenario that falsely bulks up the cost of clean energy resources to justify slow walking coal retirements, or building fracked gas plants. The Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, said the best path forward for consumers in the climate is one that prioritizes energy efficiency, wind, solar, and battery storage. And I just love this from the NRDC. So North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light filed a petition in July of last year to intervene to fight for energy justice in North Carolina as the state transitions to a carbon-free economy. And here are excerpts from the letter that to the North Carolina Utilities Commission from the steering committee of the Orange Chatham Interfaith Care for Creation Group, which I serve on the steering committee of, along with other steering committee members from Binkley Baptist, St. Thomas More Catholic, Kahila Synagogue, and other area communities of faith. Why is Duke Energy insisting on continuing with ruinous fossil fuel plants that should be obsolete and will be economically obsolete before the end of their useful lives? Duke Energy is just not trying hard enough with this plan. As an interfaith community, we implore Duke Energy to embrace an energy plan that is far more respectful of God's creation and for the life granted to us and other creatures on this planet and in this special place we call home, North Carolina. The Environmental Defense Fund also urged the Commission to reject Duke's plan, calling on it to develop a plan that emphasizes renewable energy and battery storage to improve affordability and to promote equity. So, last December, as required by law, the North Carolina Utilities Commission released the state's first carbon reduction plan. But the steps it directed Duke Energy to take to cut carbon emissions were met with widespread criticism. Too much reliance on new natural gas plants and too many potential rate hikes. This is from the Southern Environmental Law Center, which is an amazing nonprofit organization. I had the pleasure of serving on their President's Council for 7 years. North Carolina Warm, another great nonprofit promoting energy and climate justice, called the plan a gift to Duke Energy. Down at the bottom it says, solar cuts, massive new fossil fuel plants leave Duke speeding headlong away from the clean energy transition. So what are we going to do? Again, this is from The Big Fix, that wonderful book that my bossy sister gave me. Because they have so much power over the electric grid, these utility boards need to hear from the concerned public much more than they do. It's not necessary to master all the complicated rules to have an influence. You can just sign up for emails from a group in your state that advocates clean energy, like the Sierra Club, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Western Resource Advocates, NRDC, Vote Solar, Southern Environmental Law Center, Fresh Energy, Mountain Mamas, and the Environmental and Climate Justice Program of the NAACP, and many others. Then you can respond whenever they ask for public support. If you can't get to the state capitol and testify to the Public Utilities Commission in person, you can write a letter or file an electronic comment. In most states, you can testify via video call. The louder the public voice in favor of clean energy, the more pressure the commissioners will feel to get your state moving on this issue. So, the plan was approved. The first plan, it's just the first. They've got to do this every 2 years at the Utilities Commission. But what's going on right now? Here's the slide from the Sierra Club, and by the way, all of this information is available on the Earth Care website. I'm going to show you exactly where that is. Duke is currently asking for a $623 million rate increase, which would be an average of over $300 a year for a residential electric bill. The North Carolina Utilities Commission recently approved an inferior carbon plan, which allows Duke to combine fossil fuels with nuclear and a disappointing amount of solar and wind to achieve a 70% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2030. Duke is asking for this huge increase to fund an inferior plan. The North Carolina League of Conservation Voters says Duke's request for a 16% rate hike, which is a rate hike over the next 3 years, totaling 16%, is due to its increasing reliance on methane gas. There are so many ways to make your voice heard. Here's a petition you can sign from the North Carolina Conservation Network, which is another fantastic organization. So, as I said, you can find links to all of this and much, much more, like way too much more. I got really excited. I tried to organize it in a logical way, and you'll see it when you go there. But you just click on that exciting little additional resources link. By the way, all the videos from our prior classes are there as well. All right, I told you there's a lot. These are all hyperlinks that'll take you exactly where you want to go. That you can watch this video for free. You can watch the other 2 videos. There's the big fix. I highly recommend it, even though I'm just getting started, but boy did I devour chapter 2 and the intro. You can read the intro for free on Amazon, by the way, and chapter 1. There's the deal about North Carolina's carbon reduction plan. Here's on the right-hand side, take action now, and I'll give you a close-up of those screens. Here is what we're talking about right now. The plan was approved in December, unfortunately. But now Duke is there doing what everybody thought they were going to do, which is saying we need more money because we want to build more natural gas plants. And here's how you take action on that. Please take action on that. And please stay engaged because another plan has to be approved in 2024. Okay, I want to finish with this. In 2006, 17 years ago, the PCUSA General Assembly passed a resolution strongly urging all Presbyterians to aspire to living carbon-neutral lives, and to inform all Presbyterians of the urgent need for them to reduce their energy consumption and of the injustice of current energy practices. It calls upon all Presbyterians to take this seriously, to pray, asking for God's forgiveness and guidance, to calculate their carbon emissions, and to strive to make their lives carbon neutral. It even published a guide to going carbon neutral. Interfaith Power and Light is calling on congregations to take a pledge to cut carbon emissions by 50% in 2030, which the state of North Carolina has put into law, and by 100% in 2040, as opposed to 2050 like the North Carolina plant law, which is not fast enough, as the IPCC report has made absolutely clear. I'm going to focus on the final 2 points here. Interfaith Power and Light will help you every step of the way, from measuring your current carbon footprint, to identifying ways to reduce, to going solar. Interfaith Power and Light has resources to help you. You can sign a pledge on behalf of your congregation or your household. And that's where I'm going to stop, because we have 14 minutes left. So, Interfaith Power and Light also sent along a list of discussion questions, which I thought was interesting. And Marielle, you look through the discussion questions. Where's Marielle?
Right here.
Okay. And I did as well, and I think you're exactly right about the ones that are relevant. And I think in keeping with what Interfaith Power and Light, so let's open all of this up to any type of discussion, but I would like to drill in on a few of these questions from Interfaith Power and Light. Yes?
I'm struck by how many organizations, and I wonder if any of them ever contemplate merging so you get a more massive response rather than, or is it better to have lots of smaller ones?
Well, that's a good question, and yes, there are mergers. I know in the world of land trusts, which I'm most familiar with, there are mergers where land trusts have overlapping territories and, just really operating on a shoestring budget. I'm sure the same is true here. I will just point out quickly that the Southern Environmental Law Center, and look at this, they talk about clean energy advocates. They are representing, I think, 4 different organizations. And I know one of them is the Sierra Club, one of them is the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and I don't want to name the other 2 because I'll get it wrong. But there is a lot of joining of forces in this. But I think the best way to proceed is to find those that resonate with you for whatever reason and that you trust. And like the book, The Big Fix says, you don't have to master the details. I promise you, 2 weeks ago, as I was preparing for this class, my head was spinning. And it was still spinning when my beloved bossy sister gave me that book. And I read that book, and it really became much more clear to me. That find organizations that you can trust, sign up for their action alerts, and let the Utilities Commission hear your voice, because that, in North Carolina, that's the type of systematic change that this planet needs right now. And I think I said this in the very first class, there is a temptation when you get excited about something like composting or recycling to say, I'm doing my part. This is our part now, folks. This is what we have to do. And I mean advocate and engage with the Utilities Commission. It's not that complicated when you've got an environmental organization that you really trust, or 2 or 3 or 10, helping you every step along the way and telling you the main points, and then of course you personalize it. Don't just copy and paste the form letter that a nonprofit sends to you, whether it's a land trust or a talking to the Utilities Commission. Personalize it as well, just a little bit. That lead sentence. Otherwise, they're going to say, okay, that's one of a gazillion that all came from the same thing, and they sometimes they treat that as one. So, the very first question from Interfaith Power and Light: what does your religion or faith or your own ethical beliefs say about the responsibility towards workers and frontline community members who are at risk of being left behind in the transition to a clean energy economy? I do not profess to have the answer to that question. Mary Ellen, you have to have the answers to all these questions.
Well, as I'm preparing for the environmental justice and climate justice class next week, it makes me really think about love your neighbor, right? And there's so many citations in the Bible of like how important it is to love your neighbor. And in all of the climate justice issues, I think that needs to be the leading kind of like theological grounding from a faith perspective, obviously. But like we can't, actually I have with me this book by Mary Robinson, who was the president of Ireland, and then also UN Special Envoy on Climate Change. She talks a little bit about that, and quotes a gentleman who's like, we're not opposed to solar, but we're opposed to our towns shutting down and having no livelihood and having no money to pass on to the next generation. They just want a just transition. So I mean, I think the love thy neighbor is kind of the basis for making sure that that just transition happens.
And how does that happen?
People smarter than me. I don't know.
Job training?
Yeah, there are a lot of, yeah.
Yeah.
Churches, I think, have a unique opportunity as nonprofits because they don't come under the same regulations as secular nonprofits. We are free to do what we want to do and choose to do. And as long as it meets whatever safety, danger, regular common law understanding. And so we've got an opportunity here right next to the university, right in the middle of a bunch of young people that are open and looking for new ideas and looking for things to do. And we've got a nice opportunity right here across the street.
Are you talking about solar in particular?
Yeah.
Making our solar panels visible?
Yeah, because that first little bit we did, the Historic District Commission told us they didn't want them to be seen.
Yeah.
And they've allowed, I mean, automobile, they are as much a part of our survival as automobiles were at one time.
Yes. And as you know, Toby, and everybody on the Earth Care team who heard me talk about this, I'm all for our solar panels being visible for exactly the reasons you just said. And I was all saying, let's have a big old fight about that. How great would that be? And then I read the actual code of the historic district, and the way the code is currently written, they cannot be seen. But the code can be changed.
Right.
But we can't say, by golly, we're gonna lift those up right now and make them be seen. It's sort of like when you move into a neighborhood and you say, I want to build a barn and a chicken coop, and they say, well, actually our homeowners association covenants say you literally cannot do that. You either have to get those changed or move to or buy a house in a different neighborhood. But Toby, you know I'm with you, man. I'm with you. But let's get the code changed before we pick a fight with them. And I love to fight, as somebody in this room. Yeah. Well, I was. But I'm not anymore because I shut up and I don't mean shut up, but I mean I read the code and it's pretty clear.
Mother Nature's teaching us
Yeah.
every minute of the day. You can read that.
Yeah.
So John, are you concerned that they're lumping wind, solar, and battery together? I'm a little concerned about that they don't talk about the battery issue. You know, the storage, the lithium, where does the lithium come from? The country that these children are digging in. You know, lithium is very volatile. You know, there's been many fires from all kinds of batteries. I'm a little, and yeah, the charging stations, it's great if you put solar panels on top of them. But if you don't, it's still electricity, coming from the electric grid. That's just my, I wish maybe that, because solar and wind are quite different than batteries.
Yes, and again, this is all part of the big complicated picture of environmental justice. How do we do a just transition? But batteries are critical to intermittent clean energy supplies like the sun, which doesn't shine at night, last I checked, or the wind, which doesn't blow all the time. So you've got to store. The way the grid is currently works, and this is another thing I haven't said yet about this amazing book, The Big Fix. In one chapter, chapter 2, about energy, it basically explains to you how electricity works in a way that, I mean, my sister is not a techie person, and she said this book is so amazing, it explains things in a way that even I can understand.
So don't everybody crash Amazon and order it.
Yeah.
Buy it from your local bookstore.
You got your computer with you, don't know yet.
But great question, but batteries are a critical part of this whole thing, and that
But for what part, for what part, where,
massive at the point of generation, because the way the system works now, and this is what I started to say, is it's a one-way, on-demand electrical grid, meaning we've got to have that electricity when we need it, like when it's really cold or it's really hot and there's a surge in demand, they've got to crank up those plants and send more. But you've got to have batteries. Batteries smooth out that demand and enable a smart grid. Not only a smart grid, meaning you don't have to always anticipate exactly how much electricity is needed, but also the ability to store. And for those of us with solar panels on our roof, the ability for that to be stored either locally or a system level. And I gotta save time for you, Katie, to at least talk a couple minutes about the solar panels that you all decided to put on your house and why you did that. But yes, first.
No, I can't possibly articulate what they're doing, but my understanding is that Wolfspeed is actively working on that right now.
Yeah.
And another company that they're, and when they explained it to me, I could, for about a minute or two, explain what they were doing, but it's lost on me now. But
yeah.
But I do think storage batteries are different than electric cars or electric scooters.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, storage batteries.
Yeah.
That's what they're working
They need to.
And a lot of really, really smart people and a lot of money is addressing exactly these issues we're talking about right now. And what I think the film made a good point of is that the utilities need to be investing those resources in figuring that out and changing to this new grid instead of building new gas-burning power plants. Yeah.
If we went to all electric cars, how much more power from our electrical system would be needed? What kind of cost is there to generate that?
Well, that is a really good question and was answered in one of the sections that I skipped in the video. But my understanding is that demand for electricity is actually not just flat, but declining because of energy efficiency, because of conservation, because of smart thermostats, because of all the things that because of LED light bulbs. And so the point that this made was the utility, and they even had a guy from Georgia Power who works for Georgia Power, the big utility there, saying, yeah, we're selling less electricity now. We need to get on board with EVs and be on the front end of that, so that's a huge potential new market for us. That is the huge market, because EVs, whether we like them or don't like them, they are happening, and that it is here, and it is happening. But yes.
You're gonna talk more about getting them to come here?
Getting what?
To look at our church.
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you for asking about that.
I don't know, are these LED lights?
No.
No. Look at all of the lights.
No, they are LED lights where we've did renovations in Denham Hall.
They're what?
They are LED lights where we did the renovations in Denham Hall.
Yeah.
The education wing has LED lights.
Right, yeah.
So, as John knows better than, and certainly me, and maybe better than anybody in this room, this church made amazing strides in energy conservation when we did the Denham Hall build. We also did a lot of retrofitting for energy efficiency and water efficiency. So when we go back and do our baseline, it's going to be from a time before we did all those renovations, because we need to get credit for those.
Have we ever talked about carbon neutrality as a church?
Not.
That's our next mission.
Not general.
It has been mentioned in the admin committee, because as we're thinking about capital funding for the church longer term, we've got to start thinking about this. And because we have to, on the admin committee, we're thinking about what money can we set aside, because it's an older building. We need to be able to think about not only repairs, but moving into the future. So very, very generally, we have talked about it, but like solar panels, until we can say they can be shown, how do you become carbon neutral? So but yeah, it's talked about very, very generally, but I think session needs to continue
Yeah, should we
to
consider
reinforce that.
signing the pledge?
I think we should.
Yeah.
So there is actually a question, as some of you, all of you Earth Care team members know, every year we fill out an audit of Earth Care actions that we as a congregation took in the prior year. And that's how we get recertified every year by PCUSA as an official Earth Care congregation. And it's in the areas of facilities, worship, education, and outreach. And it's this wonderfully comprehensive spreadsheet where you either say yes or no, or to what degree, or how many times did you do this, and then you get points for recertification. And one of the questions that has been on there ever since we've been filling these out, when did we first do this, 2019? Mm-hmm. One of the questions is, has your session approved a plan to become carbon neutral according to the General Assembly 2006 Carbon Neutral Challenge? And we have not. I think it's something that would be lovely to be discussed, with gratitude and acknowledgement to everybody who manages and runs this church, who did such an amazing job with the capital campaign and the Dunham Hall construction and all of the refurbishments and energy efficiencies that we've done so far. And of course the solar panels that we've put in. Katie, will you just very quickly talk about solar panels? I'm sorry I didn't.
I don't know what exactly you want me to say, but it was strangely easy to install solar. I mean, I didn't physically do it, but actually the most difficult part for me, we worked through NC Solar Now, and they were lovely, and they wanted to make it financially viable for us, was like their number one priority. So at first they said, we don't recommend it for you unless you want to take down some trees. I said, no, I'm a tree hugger, I want to keep my trees, but I also want to put up solar panels. And so I did have to kind of like go a little higher than the initial person I spoke to, because they have like an official cutoff of like what % efficiency they want to move forward with you. But once I got past that first hurdle, they were amazing and super supportive. We did it in December, I think. And I mean, got a really nice tax refund this year, this spring. And then also, I mean, we've been knocking Duke Energy a lot, but they made it really easy to connect to the grid. And so like our solar, what we gather goes into the grid, and then they give it back to us, but we get credit for, everything contributed. And I wish Bill was still here, because he follows like every day, like what percentage of our energy did we cover. And he's really fascinated by that. I was more the front person setting it all up. And then so Duke Energy also gave us a rebate of another like $3,000 recently.
Katie, with your investment, what like long-term, when are you gonna break even from that investment?
It's supposed to be 15 years as costs increase, though that may actually be less, like compared to what we would pay. And I think that factors in the tax rebate already.
Thank you.
I'm happy to talk to you. I'll tell you how much we paid and if you're interested in details.
The solar panels on the roof of the church, as of a couple days ago when I last checked, because I nerd out on the interface for the church's solar panels too, we've saved almost 5 tons of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere since those were installed last June or July. Yes.
I think that's right, yeah. It was June.
Yeah, it was 3 tons when we did the Chimes article in November, and now it's 5 tons.
Oh, wow.
One other thing to keep in mind, the statistics that this documentary showed about the cost of solar and wind and how much less they already are than coal and gas-fired plants. Those were 2017 statistics. It has dropped significantly since then, and the number of jobs created by fossil fuel energy efforts has dropped even further, and the number of jobs in clean energy are much higher, and the number of jobs in energy efficiency occupations, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed. And I've got info on the Earth Care webpage about that. I didn't have time to get to it today because I really wanted to focus on having us communicate with the North Carolina Utilities Commission. So, yes?
Has there been some effort to reduce the benefit that a person who puts solar panels on their home receives from Duke Power? There's some resistance to that or lessening of it.
So, did you hear the question?
Not fully.
Has there been some resistance by Duke Energy, et cetera, to allow the maximum amount of benefit that an individual who puts solar panels on their house? The answer to that is yes, and it's actually been in the news recently because I know we've been following that. My sister, who gave me the book, lives in Asheville, and they just built a house in Asheville and put solar panels on it. And so they, particularly her husband, are really excited about monitoring everything. I will get you more info about that. It's a little above my pay grade. And
my sense is that people who don't want to continue the benefit, and so they're reducing it, or Duke Power is taking a different position.
My understanding is that Duke Power is trying to reduce the amount of benefit that can be gained by people who have solar panels, either allowing them to have discounts off of their electricity bill or to sell power back to Duke or whoever their provider is. And that has been in the news recently, but I will get more information about that. One last thing I will talk about, and this was actually one of the other chapters in this book, is about building codes. And Katie sent me a story from North Carolina Public Radio about how there is the North Carolina Building Code Council, or the state government is trying to put in place updated building codes regarding energy efficiency. And they're getting big time pushback by home builders who are saying that, well, that'll add $20,000 to the cost of the average home, pushing homeownership out of the reach of most North Carolinians. And building codes are woefully outdated in terms of energy efficiency.
Like 2002, I think, is what the codes are from.
Yeah, I will put that up on the webpage as well. I was going to play that little radio clip into the microphone, but instead of hearing WNC.
But they said letters in support of the code changes can be directed to Deputy Commissioner of Engineering Carl Martin. We can get that.
Yes, and it's actually, the deadline for those letters is sometime next month, isn't it? Yeah.
Why don't we send an email
We will
about
send
that?
an email about that, yeah. Because buildings they got a whole chapter in the Big Fix. Buildings are a huge guzzler of energy and a great opportunity to not only reduce carbon emissions, but save a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point of this, is making building codes more energy efficient. Okay, maybe the house costs $20,000 more. You are going to recoup that money very quickly, and then on ad infinitum that you own that house. So.
Much more.
Thanks, John.